Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, typically in a game of Magic, when a creature is on your side, you usually want to keep them in play. In fact, there are plenty of spells out there that can help protect your creatures to do that very thing. So many players out there work very hard to keep their creatures alive. But then there are creatures in Magic that actually want to die. Because when these creatures do die, they have a death trigger and they give you a massive benefit. So instead of actively working to keep these creatures alive, you're going to be actively working to get them killed. Kinda morbid, but very effective. So get your free sacrifice outlets ready and let's jump into some fantastically powerful creatures that want to die. And the first one that I want to bring up is an extremely flavorful card with Reef Worm. Reef Worm is just a 0/1 worm for 3 and a blue, so yeah, if that was it, it'd be incredibly terrible. But luckily it says, when Reef Worm dies, create a 3/3 blue fish creature token with. When this creature dies, create a 6/6 blue whale creature token with. When this creature dies, create a 9/9 blue kraken creature token. I think this card can be summed up by the fantastic quote from Qui-Gon Jinn, "There's always a bigger fish." Essentially, this worm gets eaten by a fish, which gets eaten by a whale, which gets eaten by a kraken. So this card is kind of like 4 creatures and 3 death triggers in one. The more death triggers that you get with this card, the more powerful of a creature that you have. And while initially, again, you're spending 4 mana for a 0/1, you eventually get a 3/3, which for 4 mana still isn't great, but then you get a 6/6, which, yeah, is pretty good, and then a 9/9, which is incredible. So yeah, in total, for 4 mana, you're getting 18 power across 4 bodies. So yeah, this is a very flavorful and effective creature with some incredible death triggers. And speaking of an incredible death trigger, let's talk about Elenda the Dusk Rose, which works in different ways with death triggers. Elenda is a 1/1 vampire knight with lifelink, and she has, whenever the creature dies, put a ++1 counter on Elenda the Dusk Rose. And then her death trigger is, when she dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink where X is Elenda's power. Keep in mind that Elenda is counting any creature on the battlefield dying, including your opponents. So whether they die in combat, or from targeted removal, or from specific board wipes, you can get a lot of counters on this. And while Elenda, of course, can be a very effective giant creature with lifelink, you also very much want Elenda to die. Sure, you can have a 20/20 lifelinker, but wouldn't you rather have 20 1/1 vampires with lifelink? By Elenda dying, you can easily flood the board with a ton of lifelinking tokens, and then with any kind of anthem or pump effects, you can easily finish off the game. See, Elenda is a creature that benefits from other creatures dying, and then you benefit very heavily when she dies. But next up, let's move on to another creature that benefits us from dying based on its power. Lifeblood Hydra is a 0/0 Hydra trample that costs X green green green. It's gonna come into play with X ++1 counters on it, and when it dies, you gain life and draw cards equal to its power. So unlike Elenda, the amount of counters that we're getting on this is based off of how much we pump into that X. And obviously, since this is green, we've got to be in a green deck for this, so we've got access to the best ramp cards out there, and we can get a lot of mana into that X in a lot of scenarios. And of course, having a giant trampling Hydra on the battlefield can really help us out in combat. But more importantly, this is going to help us through death even more. Since our opponents can't chump block this very well might die in combat, but other times we might just even want to sacrifice our big beater to get that benefit. gaining a ton of life is nice, but the main thing that makes this incredibly impactful is drawing cards equal to its power. I mean, at the end of the day, this is kind of like a delayed Sphinx's Revelation, but on a creature that can deal massive amounts of damage for us. So again, although sometimes it's going to be very beneficial to keep this in play and keep swinging with it, other times it's just going to benefit us from sacrificing it and drawing a ton of cards, and of course gaining a lot of life as well. Next up, let's move on to another green creature that we want to die with World Shaper. World Shaper is a 3/3 Merfolk Shaman, and whenever it attacks you may mill 3. And then when it dies, put all land cards from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So this card can kind of be a conundrum for our opponents. If we attack an opponent with this, it's going to be a tough decision for if they want to block it or not block it. We're going to mill 3, hopefully putting more and more lands into our graveyard, and if they block and kill it, well, then we get a lot of lands into play tapped. But if they don't block it, then next time we're just going to attack again, get some more damage in, and mill some more to get even more lands in. So the longer that this stays in play and keeps attacking, the more potential lands we're going to be getting and the bigger benefit we get from when this actually dies. So your opponents very well may never kill this in combat, and because of that, again, you're probably going to want a sacrifice outlet or some other way to sacrifice this so you can get that benefit yourself. But yeah, for this 4 mana, this can ramp you an incredible amount, especially in decks that can mill themselves further with other cards and get lands in their graveyard in different ways. Next up, let's move on to Moldgraph Monstrosity. This is an 8/8 insect with trample that has, when it dies, exile it and then return 2 target creature cards at random from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a death trigger that we're only going to be getting once because this exiles itself, so we can't get it back in some other way to get that death trigger again. But that death trigger, though random, can be incredibly impactful. If you've got a deck that doesn't really have any small creatures in it and just has a bunch of powerful ones, well, this can be pretty much guaranteed to get you some heavy hitters. Or another way to guarantee that you can get big creatures in play with this is by basically pruning your graveyard. Maybe you've got some ways to get cards from your graveyard back in your hand or exiling them, etc, etc. Regardless, yeah, already an 8/8 with trample for 7 mana is pretty good, and then just adding that giant death trigger on top of it can be game changing. But speaking of game changing, let's talk about the previously banned in Commander, Protean Hulk. Protean Hulk is a 6/6 beast that says, when it dies, search your library for any number of creature cards with total converted mana cost 6 or less and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. For the right deck, this can be an absolutely broken death trigger. Because when this dies, again, if you've got the right creatures in your deck, you can just go grab the right combination of creatures that have a total converted mana cost of 6 or less, and then you just win with all of them in play. Infinite combos in Protean Hulk are definitely a thing. And yeah, like I mentioned before, this card used to be banned in Commander and was unbanned back in 2017, and then that unbanning eventually led to the ban of Flash because in CDH, that was a bit too powerful of a combination. Regardless, even without infinite combos, this can be a fantastic toolbox card that can grab you the right creatures for the situation that you're in, so yeah, that is a fantastically powerful death trigger. And speaking of a death trigger that grabs you something incredibly powerful, let's talk about Arena Rector. Arena Rector is a 1/2 human cleric that has, when it dies, you may exile it. If you do, search your library for a planeswalker card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So, like Moldgraph Monstrosity, you can't just keep getting this back and you're only getting that death trigger once, but still, that is an incredibly powerful death trigger. So with this 4 mana card, you can sacrifice it and go get, oh, I don't know, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, or Garruk Apex Predator, or Karn Liberated. Yeah, there's a lot of planeswalkers out there that cost quite a bit more than 4, and that can basically end games on their own. Or at the very least, they can provide you an absurd amount of value, again, for just a 4 mana card. And speaking about an absurd amount of value for a 4 mana card, let's talk about Aura Thief. Aura Thief is a 2/2 illusion with flying, and its Oracle text reads, when it dies, you gain control of all enchantments. My goodness, for 4 mana, that is an incredibly powerful effect. So if your friend's got an Enchantress deck, have fun with that. Just keep in mind, though, that this doesn't let you actually move auras. Those auras would stay on the same creatures, but still, gaining control of all the enchantments on the board can be a game-changing and a game-ending play. Yeah, I'll take that Rhystic Study and that Zendikar Resurgent. Oh, and how about that Warstorm Surge? Maybe a Ghostly Prison, and how about a Necropotence? Yeah, there's a lot of powerful enchantments that you can steal with this, and again, you get all of them. But speaking about stealing things, let's talk about Kaiga the Tidestar. Kaiga the Tidestar is a 5/5 dragon spirit with flying, and it says, when it dies, gain control of target creature. Now, gaining control of just one thing in comparison to Aura Thief might not seem all that impressive, but gaining control of the most powerful creature on the board can be a huge swing in a game. And what makes Kaiga the Tidestar especially effective is if it's run as a commander, you can run a lot of clones around it, and then you're going to be gaining control of a lot of things. You essentially just keep cloning it over and over again. Every time you make a clone of it, because that clone is legendary, that clone's gonna die, so you sacrifice it, and then you go gain control of something else. So your clone spells in that deck essentially become gain control of target creature spells. Regardless, we've got another Dragon Spirit from Kamigawa with Yosai the Morning Star. It's a 5/5 flyer, and when it dies, target player skips their next untap step, tap up to 5 target permanents that player controls. This is an absolutely brutal death trigger. First off, if this just sticks around in play, your opponents are going to be very wary on what they do tap and what they don't tap, because they have to realize that if they tap out all their lands, they very well might be shut out on an entire turn. You can basically time walk an opponent with this. Or, if you can get this in play and then just sacrifice it right away, you can surprise a player out of nowhere and shut them out for a turn. And shutting a player out for a turn can be a game-ending play, especially in a multiplayer format like Commander. If one player's ahead but they tapped out all their lands and they've got some creatures in play that you can tap down with this, well, you tap those things down and then they can't untap during their next untap step. And then every player gets at least one free crack at them in combat. So good luck surviving that. And the last Kamigawa dragon that I want to bring up in this episode is Kakusho the Evening Star. Kakusho is a 5/5 dragon spirit with flying that has, when it dies, each opponent loses 5 life. You gain life equal to life lost this way. So this is kind of like the death trigger version of Grey Merchant of Asphodel, but with a set amount of life. Draining each opponent for 5 and gaining 15 is definitely a fantastic thing, and it's even better if you can keep getting this back over and over again, and yeah, you're in black, so you definitely can. So keep draining your opponents and padding your life total with the very lovely Kakusho the Evening Star. But now let's move on to a creature with a death trigger that helps us out in a very different way. Gerard Weatherlight Hero is a 3/3 human soldier with first strike, and when it dies, exile it and return to the battlefield all artifact and creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So first up, this is fantastic board wipe protection for you. If this is in play and someone casts a Wrath, well, everyone's losing all their creatures, but you're getting yours back. And of course, if they cast a bigger Wrath that, say, blows up all non-land permanents, you're also getting all of your artifacts back too. So this can essentially make a lot of board wipes very one-sided, including your own. And on top of saving your creatures, if you've got creatures that have ETBs, you get those again with this. Of course, this can also be used and abused in egg-style decks where you're looking to sacrifice a bunch of artifacts and getting them back into play for value. And although it's pretty convoluted, there's actually a way to go infinite with this as well as your commander, but I'm not going to be getting into that today. Regardless, this can be an incredibly powerful death trigger in a lot of situations. And then we've got Mind Slicer, which has a very different but still very powerful death trigger. Its Oracle text reads, when it dies, each player discards their hand. Now, you may have built a deck where you're completely fine with losing your hand, or actually you can even benefit yourself from losing your hand like in a Madness deck. But your opponents most likely don't have a deck like that and very much don't want to lose their hands. So you can demolish your opponent's hands and get rid of a ton of their potential resources and just throw a wrench into all their plans. And of course, with this you can probably get some damage through because certain opponents are probably not going to want to block this. But again, since you're in black, you've got plenty of ways to also sacrifice it to just force that hand discard. But now we have to talk about what might be the most brutal out of all the death triggers with Bearer of the Heavens. Bearer of the Heavens is a 10/10 giant, and when it dies, you destroy all permanents at the beginning of the next end step. Get ready to start the game over once this hits the battlefield. Because if this 10/10 giant is ever killed, it takes everything else with it. Now, of course, there are ways to use this death trigger to your own benefit where, you're going to be fine. Again, if you've got Gerard Weatherlight Hero in play, you're okay. Your opponent's creatures and artifacts are all gone, but you get yours back. And of course, if you've got creatures that are indestructible or ways to make your permanents indestructible, they're going to stick in play too. So there are plenty of ways to use and abuse this for your own benefit where you can easily take over the game and win because your opponents are going to have absolutely nothing left and you're going to have plenty of things. I will mention though, just be careful with a card like this in a format like Commander if you don't have a plan to actually win the game. There are a lot of Commander players out there that might not want to play with a card that basically restarts the game. So if you're planning on playing this card, ask your playgroup first. But next up, quickly, I do want to highlight some creatures that don't have a death trigger, but still want to die in their own way, and let's start with Sakura Tribelder as a fantastic example of this. Sakura Tribelder, better known as Steve, is a 1/1 Snake Shaman that has sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield, tap, then shelf your library. Basically, this is a rampant growth on a body, and yeah, poor Steve never really stays out there for too long. It may get a block in there every now and then, but then you're just going to sacrifice it anyways for that basic land. Next up, let's talk about Selfless Spirit, a 2/1 Spirit Cleric with flying that has sacrifice it, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Selfless Spirit is definitely very selfless, essentially sacrificing itself for the benefit of your team. If someone casts a board wipe, and even if it's you casting a board wipe, which could definitely be the case, you just sacrifice this, and then all of a sudden, that is a one-sided board wipe. So again, like Gerard Weatherlight Hero, this can save your team, but in a different way, and yeah, for just 2 mana on a 2/1 flyer. But now let's talk about Magus of the Wheel, a 3/3 human wizard that has pay 1 and a red and tap and sacrifice it. Each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. Basically, this is a Wheel of Fortune on a body, and yeah, sacrificing Magus the Wheel is something that's definitely going to benefit you in the right deck. This can stick around and play until the exact right time where you need to just wheel and refill your hand, and then you're good to go. And finally, I have to highlight my little buddy from my Kenrith deck with Spore Frog. Spore Frog is a 1/1 frog that has sacrifice Spore Frog, prevent all combat damage to be dealt this turn. Basically, it's a fog on a frog. Get it? Regardless, in that Kenrith deck and other decks like it, there are ways to get this creature back out again and again and again. So this is a repeatable fog that can essentially shut down an opponent, or maybe even more than one opponent, from ever hitting you with their creatures. So yeah, Fog Frog, I definitely had to mention you in this episode. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.